In this video, I'm going to break down 5 reasons why you should consider publishing more solo podcast episodes in order to grow and monetize your podcast way faster. So look, let me guess, you've done everything they said would grow your podcast. You've landed great guests, you've leveraged their audience, and you follow the interview first strategy, which essentially means that your podcast primarily is focused around interviewing guests on your show. You invite guests onto your podcast because 1, of course, is great for your network. 2, is great to provide someone else's perspectives, add more value to your content. And 3, hoping that if you invite a guest onto your podcast and have a decent following, that when they promote their episode to their audience, your show will grow. You'll be able to reach a new audience who you wouldn't have had access to before. But yet, your downloads aren't skyrocketing and your inbox isn't blowing up with leads. This is honestly the reality for most entrepreneurs and experts with the podcast who want to generate more leads and clients from their podcast, but are stuck with a traditional interview-based podcast which creates great content and builds their network but doesn't consistently turn listeners into clients. So look, my name is Anthony Winery and I'm the co-founder of Get.com, a company helping education-based podcasters as entrepreneurs and experts turn a slow growth show into a rapidly growing positive ROI podcast. Over the last 4 years, I've interviewed and coached 350 plus podcasters, and I'm the co-host of Why Your Podcast Isn't Growing, which generated $120,000 in profit in the last 9 months. Here's the thing that nobody tells you. Interviews don't sell. And yes, sure, can they grow your audience? Absolutely. Can it help you get more exposure? Yes. Will it help you build an incredible network? For sure. But when it comes to actually turning listeners into clients on a consistent basis, solo episodes are the secret weapon. And yet most podcasters treat their own voice like background noise. They're convinced that their audience only cares about big name guests, but the truth is listeners tune in for you. And maybe you might have some concerns around your show. Maybe you've considered doing a solo podcast before, but for whatever reason you decided not to. For whatever reason, maybe you thought that having a bigger guest on, is about the guest, is not about yourself. Now here's the thing, if your goal is to use the podcast as, lead generation for your business, to attract dream clients to your business, they need to hear your insights, your expertise, your voice, because that's what builds trust with them. And that trust is then what turns them into an actual client. Now think about it. When was the last time you hired someone because they interviewed a great host? Probably never, right? But when someone shares, again, their personal insights, a powerful lesson, a game-changing perspective that shifts how you're thinking, that's when you start paying attention. And that's why solo podcasts converts up to 3 times better than interviews. Now, if you're spending all of your time getting other people's voice on your show, but you're barely sharing your own perspective, you're missing out on a massive opportunity to turn your podcast into a business growth machine. Like I've mentioned, if you've been avoiding solo episodes because you feel awkward, or maybe you think that nobody cares about what you have to say, it's probably time to start rethinking everything you thought about solo shows versus interview-based shows. If you've been considering the pros and cons, or at the edge deciding whether or not to start more solo episodes, in this video we're going to break down 5 reasons why you need solo episodes if you want to grow and attract clients with your podcast. And look, at the end it'll be up to you if it's something you think is worth exploring or not. From my end, I know that's changed my clients' life in terms of client acquisition through their podcast. I know it's helped me a ton when it comes to reasons I'm going to break down in just a moment. But for you, I really want to share some insights and honestly, maybe create like a strong sales argument of why, if you're trying to build your personal brand, to build your authority, and to attract dream clients to your business, why solo episodes really should be mandatory. Now, before we dive into how and why solo episodes are so effective, I want to expose 3 crucial misconceptions that keeps most entrepreneurs from leveraging their full power. That sounds very dramatic, but essentially leveraging their full potential. Now, number 1 is this guest dependency fallacy. A shop owner who only opens when visiting vendors are present. Many podcasters rely way too much on interviews and they're missing out on massive opportunities to showcase their own expertise. It's like having a very powerful solution to a specific problem or to help specific customers, but always letting someone else do the talking for you. Now, the outcome of this is essentially you diminish your expert positioning, you have an inconsistent content schedule, and you have a weak relationship with your audience. Now, don't get me wrong, are there exceptions? For sure. Of course there are. But if you're using this again specifically, the podcast specifically to build build your brand and to attract dream clients to your business, the connection you could build with your audience with solo podcasts versus interview-based style shows is so much stronger. The second misconception is this idea of content overwhelm syndrome. So here's what it looks like. An entrepreneur avoids solo episodes because they think each episode needs to be a comprehensive masterclass, but that's simply not the case. Looking at their content calendar, they see a gap where solo episodes could be building momentum, but a fear of not having enough to say, which then holds them back from creating, again, massively beneficial and valuable content that will attract more listeners and more clients to their business. And the outcome of this is you miss out on tons of opportunities for quick wins. You essentially lose momentum in between interviews where you could be posting solo episodes, and your overthinking leads to inaction. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't remember the last time inaction has led to anything positive, right? And the third and final thing is, again, this whole idea of the personality blind spot. So believing that solo episodes require like a massive personality, that you've got to be like this huge entertaining character in order for it to be effective. But again, that's like thinking you need to be a performer rather than an expert. And if that's what you're going through right now, I think it's really important to know that you're essentially missing out on the point that your expertise itself is what's going to attract the listeners, is what's going to attract the clients. If you're just like this dancing monkey, don't expect to attract a bunch of clients. Will you get attention? Yes, great, absolutely. But will those people you're attracting be the right customers or the dream clients you're looking to attract? No. The dream clients you want to attract aren't looking for someone to be super entertaining. They're just looking for someone to provide them clear, actionable steps, educational content to help them solve painful problems they're going through. It's really that simple. Okay? So again, breaking this down, the three biggest fallacies is, again, dependency, thinking you need a massive guest in order for your podcast to be valuable. Worrying too much about the content and thinking, again, we have enough to say, and overthinking that. And then finally, think you've got to have this massive personality in order to make a solo episode work. It's simply not true. Here's the hard truth. If your podcast is just primarily interviews, you're making it way harder to see results, both from a growth perspective and also a monetization perspective. And I'm going to get into that in just a moment. The top 1% of coaches and entrepreneurs, they prioritize solo episodes. And really, again, I'm not talking about Joe Rogan. I'm not talking about Chris Williams. I'm not talking about, people who are massive celebrities who have interview-based shows. That's a different avatar. That's a different type of person. That's a different situation. If you're the normal business owner, online coach, expert who's still building that personal brand, trying to get that recognition, and you want to use the podcast as a client acquisition machine, you can't rely on the same systems and strategies that other celebrities and other massive, personal brands are using, because you're in a different situation. But the question is, why? Why do solo podcasts work so well? Well, that's exactly what we're about to break down. So look, here are 5 reasons why you need solo episodes if you want to grow and attract clients to your podcast. Reason number 1, clients buy from people, not panels. A quick question, right? Who are you more likely to buy from? An interviewer asking experts questions, or a trusted authority who shares insights, frameworks, and strategies on a consistent basis? If you think about it, most people, 9 times out of 10, you'll go for B, right? The person who is sharing insights, providing the frameworks, the person who is the source of value for the content. So your listeners need to trust you before they can invest. But if all you're doing is interviewing other people, your audience trusts your guests, not you. Because again, the spotlight is on your guests. Your guest is the one being the source of value. Whereas solo episodes allows you to build your authority. They position you to be an expert. They make it obvious why people should hire you to work with them. So if you're not teaching, sharing, and leading through solo episodes, don't be surprised when listeners don't want to hire you or inquire about your business when you're positioning your guests as the person of value. And I'll take this a step further and say that a lot of your listeners, let's say for example, you've not closed a deal from your podcast just yet. I would go as far as saying that a lot of your listeners are probably reaching out to a lot of the guests you have onto your show. If your guests are providing enough value and showing and demonstrating the expertise and how they can solve specific problems for your listeners, well, your listeners will naturally reach out to want to work with the guest. Now, I know this because I've been a guest on multiple shows, and I've had their listeners reach out to me because they want me to help them grow and monetize their podcast. And I've had clients who guest on other people's shows where their listeners reach out to my clients and say, hey, I love your interview you did with X, Y, and Z person. I'd love to know how we can work together. That's the power of the spotlight being on you. So again, if you're not closing deals from your podcast on a consistent basis, the likelihood is you're giving your guest business. And again, it's very collaborative. There's nothing wrong with that. But right now, I'm not focused about your guests and what's making them successful. I'm really focused in on what's in it for you. So reason number 2, into raving fans fast. So look, imagine you're at a networking event. You have 2 people having the exact same conversation with you. Person A asks a great question, nods along, but mostly lets other people do the talking. Now, are they a great listener? Yes. Would that be a great friend to have? Absolutely. But then let's say you have person B. They lead the conversation, they share valuable insights, and they teach you something that changes your perspective. Who are you going to remember? And who are you more likely to go towards to seek advice based on your circumstance? So solo episodes do the exact same thing, right? Because they deepen your relationship and connection with your audience. Because as you speaking directly to your audience is a much more intimate thing. So the same way that me making this video right now and I'm speaking to you. I'm not speaking to bloody Joe. I'm not speaking to this other guest. I'm speaking to you directly. I'm not talking to anyone else. So it helps me build a deeper relationship with you and where you're at, right? So that's the whole point of this. It also means you have to turn passive listeners into engaged fans because they get addicted to your personality. They understand what your quirks are, the strange things about you. That's what people get hooked on. So you need to share more of that. But if you're just being, let's say, a shell of yourself, being a bit quieter, being a bit more reserved and not sharing your opinions, not sharing your voice, not providing your perspective and letting your guests do all the talking, to a certain point, again, you're providing and pushing on the value on them and you're not highlighting your own expertise. And finally, they make people feel like they're learning directly from you. And when people feel personally connected to you and feel like they're getting some of the value from you, that's when they're far more likely to then buy without friction. That's when selling on your podcast becomes effortless. Reason number 3, you can control the conversation and make selling effortless. Now, here's the thing people don't really talk about when it comes to interviewing, right? You don't control the message, right? You can have a great guest on, but at the end of the day, you don't control the message. Your guest might say something absolutely amazing, and the likelihood is, if you publish an episode, I'll like to think they're saying incredible stuff, right? But they could also ramble on. I'm sure you've had guests who just ramble on, they don't get to the point, they go off topic, or they're just actively promoting themselves in a way that's not very tasteful, or they're not providing clear, actionable advice. Because when you're relying on guests solely, you're essentially hoping that the quality of content that you produce remains consistent. And we both know that that's just not the case. That's not a reality for most people. That doesn't happen, right? You can have a guest that's absolutely amazing that crushes it and a guest that doesn't crush it. Whereas with solo episodes, you eliminate that risk, right? Because you set the agenda, you're the one who's guiding the conversation, and more importantly, if you're trying to sell from your podcast, if you're trying to share a specific message with your audience, if you need your audience to believe certain stories, certain principles, in order for them to become a lead, in order for them to become a client, in order for them to even want to work with you, if you're doing guest-based episodes, you don't have control over the narrative. You can't direct the structure, the format of the conversation in the way that you want, because it's dependent on your guests and what they say. Whereas with a solo, you eliminate that again, because you can structure your episodes in a way that naturally leads to what you're having to offer, right? So if you think about solo episodes essentially as a sales call without resistance, you can indoctrinate your audience to think how you like them to think, to have certain beliefs that they need to have before they can buy from you. But if you're relying on guests, you can't have the same effect. So look, instead of convincing people in the DMs for discovery, they essentially become pre-sold because they're constantly listening to you. You're the voice of authority. And by the way, I recently had this. I recently had someone who booked in. They listened to my podcast. They loved it. And I do a solo show between me and my co-host. And we have kind of like a solo-based podcast. It's just us, the hosts. It makes a huge difference when someone shows up, has heard from us, they see us as an authority. The conversation isn't really about like, who are you? Do I trust you? It's really like, hey, take my money. I know you know your shit. I resonate a lot of how you think and your approaches. So let's just go for this. That's a totally different frame when it comes to selling your products and services. And then reason number 4, they boost your podcast and make you more discoverable. Here's what I mean. There's a huge mistake that most podcasters make, which is they believe and think that social media will grow their podcast, which is wrong, because social media actually has low reach, low discoverability, and low conversions. What do I mean? Low reach in regards to you're capped to the number of followers you have who can potentially see your stuff. Low reach in regards to the fact that even if you promote on social media and you're the best marketer on earth, only a certain percentage of your audience actually care about your podcast. Low discoverability because people aren't going on social media to discover new podcasts to listen to. That's not how it works. Do you go to social media? Do you go to TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn to discover new podcasts to listen to? No. You most likely go on there to consume educational content, to be distracted, or to have a bunch of fun, right? That's what most people do. They're not going to these platforms to discover new podcasts to listen to. And then finally, low conversion. Simply put, if people on social media aren't going onto social media to discover new podcasts to listen to, the conversion rate of you turning a stranger online who discovers your show through a promotion and having them become an active listener of your podcast is very slim. How do I know this? Well, recently, it was 2 years ago, we actually held it was like an interview. We interviewed 100 podcasters, from those getting 100,000, 200,000, $1 million per month, making 6 and 7 figures per year, to those who are strong to break past 1,000 monthly downloads. So it was a wide range of spectrum. And everyone said the exact same thing, which was, although they promote all the time on social media, it hasn't helped them consistently grow their podcast. They've been podcasting for the last 2-3 years, but their show is essentially plateaued. And the only main strategy that they use or they know of to grow their podcast is social media. Even though that main strategy for the last 2 or 3 years hasn't helped them consistently grow because they have plateaued. So can you see the dilemma here, right? Anyways, that's beside the point. I'm kind of going on a tangent here. The point is, social media is a terrible way to grow. And when it comes to growing the podcast and becoming more discoverable, Apple and Spotify, the search algorithm, drives massive organic growth if you optimize for it. So this simply means podcast SEO, being found on Apple and Spotify. That's where the majority of listeners go to discover new podcasts to listen to. And guess what? When you have a solo show, it ranks higher on search. So why is that? Well, number one, you're able to have better keyword placement in your titles and show notes, because you can intentionally create a solo podcast where you're the one directing the conversation in the solo episode. So you can title the episode whatever you want, specifically whatever keywords you want to rank for. Whereas if you invite a guest on, it's unlikely for you to dictate exactly. Could it happen where they cover the keywords and talk about, keep on topic on the keywords? Yes, that can be likely, but you don't have control over that. The second thing when it comes to solo episodes and ranking high on Apple and Spotify is people stay for longer. We've seen this time and time again. When we have clients who go from doing strictly interview-based shows, and we encourage them to explore solo podcasts, at first they're a bit nervous. They don't really, they're not used to it. It feels very new. They're worried about will I keep their attention? Will my engagement rates be good or bad? Will people actually care about what I have to say? But once they commit to that and we look at their numbers, so we review their analytics, we consistently see that they have a higher engagement, meaning that an average listener consumes more of their content when there's a solo episode versus when there's a guest. So let's say they have a guest episode and the average consumption rate or the average retention time is, let's say, 60% or 70%. When they do a solo, it's closer to 80 and 90%. Which is huge if you're trying to nurture your audience, build a deeper connection with your listeners, and turn them into actual paying clients. You need them consuming more of your content. Apple and Spotify prioritize clear, focused content. And when you're doing solo episodes, you're really creating clear, focused content. So translation, more solo episodes means new and the right listeners finding your show every single week. And the more listeners equals more potential for turning your listeners into high ticket clients. And reason number 5, solo episodes make monetization easy. Imagine you're sitting through a powerful keynote speech by an industry expert, right? They share groundbreaking insights, they deliver a compelling message, and they leave the audience hanging on every single word. Then as soon as they finish, someone else jumps on the stage and says, hey, by the way, if you need help with this thing, I have a program for you. Just think about how confusing that would be for you. You'd be like, sorry, who the hell are you, right? It would be so confusing. It feels so disconnected. And that's exactly what happens when you try to make an offer at the end of a guest interview. Because if you need your listeners to become clients, they need to take action at the end of your episode. And you have to provide them with an offer that they need to act on. So if your audience has been primed to see your guests as authority, and the guests is who they build trust with, and the guests are the ones who are helping them solve their problems. So when you finally give a CTA, it doesn't matter how clear it is, it just feels way too disconnected because the audience wasn't thinking about you. Their minds are being primed to the guests. But with a solo episode, that never happens, right? Because the center of attention is on you. You control the entire message. You build trust naturally, and when you introduce your offer, it just makes sense. And when you introduce your offer, it just makes sense as a natural next step. But most podcasts struggle to monetize because they lack a clear CTA and they lack that natural flow of the content they've produced to capture that attention that leads nicely to their offerings. They hope people essentially just find their website and consume, their interview podcast and then become a client. But that's not really how it works, right? The top podcasts, what they do is they build demand inside of their episodes. They teach, they break down specific frameworks, and they lead naturally into their offer, which makes selling inside of an actual solo episode 10 times easier than trying to pitch in an interview. Way easier. So to recap, reason number 1, clients buy from people, not panels. Reason number 2, solo episodes turn strangers into raving fans way faster. Reason number 3, you control the conversation and make selling effortless. Reason number 4, they boost your podcast SEO and makes you way more discoverable on Apple and Spotify. And reason number 5, solo episodes make monetization way easier. So look, understanding the strategic value of solo episodes isn't just about content creation, it's about building a direct path between your expertise and your ideal client's needs. While interviews are a great way and can be quote unquote a great way to grow your audience, oftentimes that doesn't even help you grow your audience, right? Solo episodes create a deep connection that drives client acquisition for your business. For entrepreneurs using podcasts to grow their business, solo episodes serve as a powerful positioning tool that showcases your unique methodologies, builds trust through consistent value delivery, and creates a natural path to your offers. So look, here are my final thoughts. I really hope that this has provided you some insights in terms of, hey, look, if you've been considering it, here are some reasons why you definitely should be doing it if it's for client acquisition purposes. And if you want to position yourself as an expert, if you want to build that brand, I've seen it change my life, I've seen it change our clients' lives, and I want to provide, hopefully, some insights into why solo episodes are worth considering for yourself. But you let me know, based on what I've just broken down, have you thought about doing solo episodes before? What's been holding you back? And are you open to exploring more solo episodes in the future? If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. We're building the #1 education platform for entrepreneurs and experts who are looking to launch and grow a successful podcast that builds their personal brand and attracts dream clients to their business. So that being said, I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.